Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. It's been a few days now since we got news out of the state of Georgia where Governor of the state Brian Kemp has officially ruled out running for the 2026 U.S. Senate race. In today's video I'm going to go over who the other potential Republicans are that could still try and make a run for the state and try and make it competitive in 2026. So if you're unfamiliar, the 2026 U.S. Senate race is 6 years after the 2020 race where Democrat Jon Ossoff won in a runoff election in a very close matchup. If you want to go back to 2020, we can look at it here. Both of the Senate races that were up at the time, the Georgia Senate race for Ossoff versus Perdue, and the Georgia special election between Warnock versus Loeffler, neither candidate was able to break 50% of the vote on the first ballot in November. So the way Georgia works is the top two candidates advance to a runoff, where one candidate has to break 50% of the vote. And in this matchup, Jon Ossoff was able to defeat David Perdue by 1.2%, winning the state of Georgia, flipping it to the Democrats in a lean Democratic margin. It coincided with the 2020 election, where Joe Biden narrowly won the state of Georgia at the presidential level by 0.24%. This was the first time a Democrat had won the state of Georgia at the presidential level since, I believe, 1992. Yes, indeed it was. So, for this election, Georgia's obviously being defended by Democratic incumbent Senator Jon Ossoff, but Republicans were really optimistic about Georgia because they feel that it's still at its core a lean Republican state. Donald Trump just won it in 2024 by 2.2%. At the Senate level, though both senators are now Democrats, Georgia just reelected its Republican Governor Brian Kemp by 7.5% in 2022 against Democrat Stacey Abrams. So Republicans are feeling optimistic that, well, maybe we can win the state of Georgia then and win it back to the Senate seat and get another Republican senator back in Georgia. However, the latest news that Brian Kemp is not running significantly hurts the Republicans' chances in Georgia. Early polling had shown Brian Kemp was the only Republican that had a lead over Jon Ossoff at this time, and now the Republican Party is essentially scrambling, trying to find another candidate that could run and try and make this a competitive race against Ossoff. Without a doubt, given Georgia how competitive of a state it is, this race will still be competitive, but the chances of Republican winning are a lot lower than they were a few days ago when Kemp was a prospective Republican candidate. On the Wikipedia page, which goes over candidates who have publicly expressed interest, you may have some familiar names for Republicans. You have Buddy Carter, U.S. Representative from Georgia, Mike Collins, U.S. Representative from Georgia's 10th District, Carter from the 1st, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene from the 14th District, Tyler Harper, Georgia's Agriculture Commissioner, John King, Insurance Commissioner, and Rich McCormick, U.S. Representative from Georgia's 7th. The only other potential candidate that has not expressed interest but is mentioned is Brad Raffensperger, Georgia's Secretary of State. It is worth noting when Brian Kemp ran for governor in 2018, I do believe he was Georgia's Secretary of State at the time, so that does put a little bit of a continuity situation where it could be another former Georgia Secretary of State running for that race. But Georgia, the House level, has 9 Republicans and 5 Democrats. You could assume, looking at all their House districts in Georgia, that at least some of the Republican representatives could be potential candidates. Carter in Georgia 1, as I mentioned, Scott in Georgia 8, maybe Allen in Georgia 12, Collins, Georgia 10. We have Jack in Georgia 3. I've heard some rumors going around that Republicans and Donald Trump may be wanting Jack to run. I've never heard of him before, but he could be a potential candidate. Marjorie Taylor Greene represents this district up here, Georgia 14, Loudermilk in Georgia 11, McCormick in Georgia 7, Clyde, Georgia 9. So any of those Republicans are potential candidates for 2026, though we've had some already express interest in running. The problem for the Republicans so far is, at least in the hypothetical early polling, right now it shows Marjorie Taylor Greene would have a lead over the Republican primary field. She would start out at 43% with her second place opponent, Brad Raffensperger, being in second with 22%. So if Marjorie Taylor Greene ran, she would have a commanding lead over the Republican primary field right now, based on the Trafalgar poll from just a few weeks ago. The problem for that is also Marjorie Taylor Greene is the weakest Republican in the early polling, showing a matchup between Ossoff and Greene would likely be a Democratic blowout victory. Still, even with this news, Inside Elections, Cook Politico, and Sablo Crystal Ball all have this race listed as either a battleground or a toss-up, which is the good news for the Republicans. Rachel White House now has it as lean Democrat, and I can certainly understand why that's the case as well. Just to show you what the early polling looked like, Jon Ossoff versus Brad Raffensperger clearly showed Ossoff with a lead over Raffensperger. The good news, though, for the Republicans is there's still about 10% saying other, 6% undecided. So even though Ossoff clearly has the advantage and would likely win this race, it's not a 100% insurmountable lead for Raffensperger. But Ossoff versus Kemp was clearly the best case for the Republicans. Kemp led, even in very close amounts, in every single poll over Jon Ossoff, whereas in the other polls, that never happened. For Jon Ossoff versus Buddy Carter, a similar finding to Ossoff versus Raffensperger. Ossoff had a lead of about 8 points over Carter in one poll. Another poll from back in January showed Ossoff with a 13-point lead. For Jon Ossoff versus John King, Ossoff leads 51-38, 47-31 over their respective polls. This one is what really scares Republicans. Jon Ossoff versus Marjorie Taylor Greene. Ossoff has 48%, Marjorie Taylor Greene 37% in the most recent poll from Trafalgar. Atlanta Journal-Constitution has Ossoff leading 54-37, Tyson 51-39. So in this matchup, not only does it look like Ossoff would beat Marjorie Taylor Greene, it looks like it'd possibly go for Ossoff over Marjorie Taylor Greene once all the undecideds are all done, by possibly even more than 5 to 10 percentage points, which would be a very big win for the Democrats in Georgia that we have not seen the margins like that in a while. Jon Ossoff versus Mike Collins. So far, Mike Collins seems to be polling the best out of any of the potential Republicans that could run that are not named Brian Kemp. And even he is losing to Jon Ossoff by 5 points in the most recent Trafalgar poll. Ossoff leads 48% to Collins 43%, 3% say other, 6% undecided. Again, down 5 points with a margin of error of 3%. This is the best alternative for the Republicans off the polling right now. And then Ossoff versus Rich McCormick, only one poll, but Ossoff is leading here by about 11 points in this poll. So what looked like Jon Ossoff versus Brian Kemp could very easily have been a Republican flip in 2026. Now the Republicans are going to have trouble trying to win the state of Georgia and are scrambling trying to find a candidate to replace Brian Kemp. As for the Senate level, I showed you the very close race in 2020. Georgia is going to be really tough for the Republicans to flip now without Brian Kemp. This race was very close. It is worth noting, actually, in the first round that David Perdue actually defeated Jon Ossoff, but since he wasn't able to break 50% and ended up going to a runoff election, where approximately 250,000 voters that voted for Perdue in the first election did not come out to vote for him in the runoff, where Ossoff got only about 100,000 less votes than he did from first round to runoff, which is a big reason why Ossoff was able to win, was Ossoff's support stuck with him more in the general and in the runoff election than David Perdue's did. And the surrounding Atlanta area was a very key reason why, as a lot more people turned out to vote in 2020 for Ossoff than Perdue. So as for the 2026 Senate map, right now, and I've made this very clear in past videos, when it was Jon Ossoff versus Brian Kemp, I actually had the race listed as lean Republican. Now with Brian Kemp not running, and it's Jon Ossoff versus the respective Republican candidates, right now I have to start it out, if I was going to make a prediction on it, as lean Democrat. I would still put it in the battleground category, because I think it will be one of the closer Senate races in the country. But until the Republicans get some clarity on who they're nominating, I have to start Georgia out in lean Democrat. Because Jon Ossoff now certainly has caught a very big break with not having to face Brian Kemp, and all the other Republicans who are running are either not well known statewide, or in Marjorie Taylor Greene's case, she is well known statewide, and that actually seems to hurt her in the polls than if she was not as well known statewide. So right now, there's no way other to say this. Democrats should be feeling very lucky and very optimistic about their chances in the state of Georgia for 2026. They dodged a major bullet with Brian Kemp not running, and this gives Jon Ossoff a much better chance at winning re-election now in 2026. As for the Republicans, we're going to have to wait and see what the Republicans try and do, and if they try to recruit a top candidate, if President Trump weighs in and endorses any potential Republicans in this state. It is also possible, though, that the Republicans just put up some U.S. representative to run who no one's ever heard of, with the anticipation that he's probably going to lose a close race, while it gives the Republicans time to go after North Carolina, Michigan, and Maine. But even all three of those Senate races are going to be very close, and there is the potential, given the right environment, the Democrats could even win all three. But we're going to have to wait and see. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to give it a like. Make sure to click subscribe. Share with all your friends and family. Leave a comment below telling me your thoughts about this video. I can't wait to check all that out. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in the next video.